Because you said something interesting. You say marriage is the biggest problem, right? But we also know that if the top alpha male gets all the women, all the betas and below him want to blow things up. So I kind of think that the reason Western civilization exists is because you have a nuclear family where pretty much any guy who isn't a complete loser can get a woman, and any woman can kind of find a man, and you get some kind of stability. So as bad as marriage is, it is controlling that male rage.
I agree that it's the best system we have. What I'm suggesting is it wouldn't take a ton of work to find a better one. All right, and we're largely primed by our upbringing, our religion, or whatever. That the only way to raise a kid is that you got to be hands-on, the two of you. I'm not sure the kids love it, and I'm not sure that the average parent is qualified compared to, let's say, a trained teacher or something like that. So I would just go so far as to say that marriage is deeply overrated, and there should be some alternatives for some types of people. I don't want to eliminate it. Marriage is always going to be perfect for some people, just not all of us.
Yeah, I think the nuclear family that we do without the extended family is kind of lunacy, where the man and woman have to be together all the time and dote over this kid, and the woman wants to talk about things that doesn't interest the man, whereas in an extended family, the woman and her mom can talk, and the men can kind of talk, but people don't want to hear that, hey, maybe men and women want to be in separate rooms sometimes talking about different things.
So imagine more of a tribal approach. All right. So if you see what makes kids happy, they don't mind being around adults. If there's maybe lots of adults and lots of kids, it's just a big happy environment, sort of a tribe. But kids don't love being with their two parents yelling at them from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed, and you end up just sort of developing this dislike for each other that was never necessary.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I wanted to be with the other kids. I didn't want to hang out with the adults. So I grew up in a very sort of religious fundamentalist home, but the good thing is we didn't go to real churches. We had home churches. So there'd be 10 different families in the house. So us kids would just be all doing our kid stuff. And it was actually pretty cool, despite the religious brainwashing. You'd kind of run around like wolves outside and playing with sticks and hitting things, and that was way more fun. And I see a lot of people that raise their kid, and I think, God, that must suck.
So a lot of it has to do with, you get married, you have a family, you need a house or apartment or whatever it is. And then you just have these walls that are keeping you from other human beings. Mm-hmm. And the thing that makes everybody happy is access to other human beings. Right. So marriage creates buildings with walls, which makes you stay inside because you're doing stuff with the family. So it's really removing the greatest happiness a human can have, which is interaction with other humans.
The social animal. So what solution would there be system-wide?
I always default to, as my first statement, everyone's different. So some people should keep their marriage exactly the way it is. I'm sure it works for a lot of people. But there are a number of people who probably need some more, let's say, contract system or more loose social structure, tribal. I know, for example, a lot of single people who have kind of cobbled together something like a family from people who live in different places. And there's somebody who can fix something in your house, answer this, watch your kid, take care of your dog. And they're very successful. Nobody complains about any of that. They're pretty happy with it. So I think there's some version of that improved that could be useful.
Okay, so now, like it or not, because you view yourself as sort of an engineer in your understanding of the world, people look to you for advice, mentorship, wisdom even. What would you tell people who are thinking about marriage or family or any of these difficult social systems?
I always go back to, I can't give advice for someone else because the biggest part of that advice is how they feel, and I don't know that. It's also true in our world that sometimes you got to let people make a mistake because you just have to do it. So I usually avoid giving anything that would be categorized as advice for an individual. Rather, I say, it's better to diversify, to do this just in general. This may or may not apply to your specific case. So I try to keep my knowledge transfer general in a way that people can use it or not use it, as opposed to say, you, Bob, should marry this woman or not marry this woman.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. My general advice to men because I tell people I don't understand what a woman should live her life is. I say if you're a man, you're probably going to fall real head over heels in love when you're 25. Don't marry when you're 25. Don't even think about it. If you want to get married, you need to live a nice sort of self-indulgent life for maybe 5-10 years. And then when you're in your 30s, think about marriage. As a general rule, not applicable to everyone. Good advice, bad advice, where can that be tweaked?
I know several people who accidentally or by bad planning had kids real young. And they have the advantage of being like in their mid-30s and free. And by then maybe built up some resources, and that's a pretty good life too. So to your point, everybody's different, right? So I would modify your advice to say, I would make it non-advice by this modification. I would say, you realize half of the people got divorced.
Right.
100% of them thought they would not be in that half.
Right.
I found that reasonable argument works with no one. Because you know what they say? Well, I'm in the half that won't. Everyone.
Well, it goes back to persuasion, the cognitive biases we tell ourselves. Ask everybody, are you an above average driver? Yeah, of course. 85% of people are above average drivers. 100% of people who are married are, because in your own mind, your irrational mind, well, we believe we're special. And that goes back to, I guess, egotistical. Because in a way, and you've written about this before, is you have to be a little bit egotistical, or you wouldn't feel like you had a meaningful life or any reason to live.
Yeah, there's a fine line. I use my ego as a tool as opposed to sort of a character flaw. So there are times when pumping it up actually improves your body chemistry, your testosterone, and your performance. So if you want to perform well, building up your ego is a pretty good deal. If you don't want to offend people who have weaker egos, you need to tamp it down in some social situations.
So how do you deal with that? So a lot of times you're going to be the highest status man in the room. How do you deal with people not being jealous or hateful? What's your key there?
I always offer beverages. By the way, would you like a beverage?
No, but you offered me one. You did offer one earlier. Thank you.
As soon as you walked in.
Yeah.
That's a real thing.
Right.
Well, first of all, any host is going to offer a beverage.
Right.
But in terms of making people comfortable, the first thing I do is say, I'm your servant, and what can I do for you?
Right.
And in fact, you saw in this interview, I'm as accommodating as I could possibly be.
Right.
That's all you can do. You can just, if people are looking at you as important because of something you did in your career, first of all, I don't internalize that. So that's, when people talk of themselves in the third person, I didn't understand that for a long time until I became a third person, because I see the character of my professional career,
Right.
almost like somebody I can observe, not somebody that is me.
Right.
So I kind of don't take it too seriously, and I make sure that other people know that.
Yeah, I noticed, I learned from Arnold Schwarzenegger, of all people, is he's this big, huge, hulking guy. And the first thing he would kind of do is try to make the other person the center of attention. So if you ever watch his body language, attention's naturally going to be directed to him. So he'd be like, wow, look at this guy here. And he would immediately physically make his body smaller, put all the center of attention on you, and then people think, oh, Arnold isn't this big, hulking, monstrous guy. He's this great guy. And that was kind of a trick that he would use on people.
I also learned early on that when it comes to famous people, people will come up with only two possible opinions of them if they meet them in person. Nice guy, and they always use that phrase. He's a nice guy, or like regular guy, right?
Right.
Or asshole, or jerk. There's nothing in between
Right.
if you're famous, because they're going to walk away with one of those two impressions. And the impression that they get in the first 30 seconds is going to be the one they walk away with. It's hard to change it.
Yeah, a good metaphor for that is grounded or being down to earth. It's always cool. Oh yeah, I met this guy, he's sort of down to earth. And it's interesting. So do people ever kind of, because even me in just my little, world, people will meet me and you can see their cheeks are like rosy red or whatever, the unconscious flushing and pupil dilation, which is, for me, took a little while to get used to. And
They can't talk for a while.
yeah, they're tongue-tied or something. So do you have that happen?
Yeah. At book signings especially, because they've really built themselves up for that moment they're
Right.
standing in front of you. I mean, I think I just enjoy it because it means that they're having an emotional experience that I'm sure they'll like.
Yeah.
So to me, it's just all good.
Yeah, when I met Jerry Spence for the first time, I had that sort of deer in the headlights, looked at fight or flight response, and so he goes, big gruff guy, come here, and he puts his arm around you, and that was sort of his way to build rapport. So I think it's kind of interesting because even though what we're talking about is in theory fame or your personal brand, it relates back to persuasion, building rapport with a person, and that's what people don't see that Trump does. Trump doesn't go up there and just talk to people. What Trump does is he builds rapport. Oh, look at that guy, look at that. Oh, well, this guy said this, and can you believe it? He's making eye contact, and he's working a room from the stage. And nobody else who's running for office, maybe Bill Clinton a while ago, Obama when he runs for office is very good. Obama as a president, it's a little bit, there's two different disconnect, but did you see that in Trump also?
Yeah, my favorite Trump personal connection moment was, I think, a town hall a few months ago on CNN, I think it was. And somebody in the audience asked a question about, I don't know, some businessy thing. And what he did was he explained it like a businessman to a student. Mm-hmm. And then when he was done and the host was starting to change the question, he looked directly at the person in the audience. He goes, for confirmation, he goes, you get that, right? And he just made it completely personal. It was, I see him doing that all the time.
Which is interesting. So did you know much about Trump before he ran? And the reason I bring this up is I had maybe watched one season of The Apprentice 15 years ago, and I had no real conception of him. So when I first saw him running, I go, oh, who is this guy? I had really no idea. And right away I go, okay, this guy has it. The it factor, the vibe.
You saw it right away.
Or whatever. Did you kind of see that right away in him?
Well, I've been following him, not with any effort.
Right.
He's just always everywhere. So I've always been fascinated with his approach to his fame and how he was using it as branding tool. So I guess I've always had it under my radar, but not as much as now.
Was it something that stood out to you when you thought, aha, this guy, when he was running, where you thought, okay, this is it?
Well, I knew he was a good communicator and popular and all the things that everybody else knew. My moment that was just when the switch just flipped was during the first debate when he was asked about his horrible sexist comments when Megyn Kelly asked him that, and he did what almost no one could have done this. It was just the greatest, most brilliant, persuasive move. His answer was, only Rosie O'Donnell.
Yes.
And he sucked the life out of the room. He made everybody who didn't like Rosie O'Donnell, which was his base, love him for it. It was funny. They liked it. It made the question irrelevant because the answer was more interesting than the question. And he ran out of time. And then he did the other brilliant thing, which is Megyn Kelly said, but you've said about other people do. Instead of denying it after he had this great laugh and people were on his side, he just sort of quietly said, I'm sure I have.
Yeah, and then he reframed it. Yeah. Well, that's the thing I like what he did is he did so many different things that you can analyze that moment. One is he made in-group, out-group. We're now making Rosie O'Donnell the joke. He changed the focus from I'm a sexist pig who makes these jokes. Right. No, we've out-grouped Rosie. And then he did the reframe, which is, well, this is why America has this problem.
Yes.
You're worried about tweets.
Political correctness, so he made it work for him. I also describe that as redirecting energy. Mm-hmm. So the energy comes in, it's on him, and he just goes, whoop, Rosie O'Donnell. And you see him do that all the time. The other time he did that, my best example was also a CNN interview. He was asked about the Pope's comments about capitalism. Pope had some negative things to say about capitalism. Now here's a trap, right? So Trump can't say, I don't like capitalism, but he can't say the Pope is wrong.
Right.
It's a no-win situation. So Trump does what only Trump can do, and he says, I would tell the Pope to worry about ISIS taking over the Vatican.
Right.
Because all the energy goes to that visual image that's like a movie. You see it. It's got religion and famous people. It's got violence. It's got, you could see it, and things are blowing up, and oh my God, they're precious artifacts. You can't get your head out of the Vatican. As soon as you put your head in the Vatican with ISIS, you're trapped there for a while. You're not getting out. Right,
which you learn in persuasion is visual metaphors are the most powerful. And then you learn, too, about the power of focus. Everybody, again, wants to focus on this issue. The Pope said X. Well, most people, they answer the questions directly. Two-dimensional, you'd call it two-dimensional persuasion. Right. Trump is, I don't care what your question is. I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about. Oh, and if you want to pin me down, which unfortunately he wasn't able to do with Chris Matthews and the whole punish abortion question. He was Chris Matthews is hard to do that too because he's good in his own way.
He's good.
But then Trump changes the focus, but doesn't that kind of apply to persuasion in your own life? I say that, you know what, guys, I have brainwashed myself into believing in myself. And people go, what are you talking about? Well, you can change the focus too in your own life, right?
Yeah. One of the biggest self-improvement tricks is that you become whatever you tell yourself you are. You can convince yourself of just about anything over time. So, earlier today I was saying that I think of myself as an entrepreneur, not a cartoonist, but a lot of that is because that's what I want to be. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's allowed me to consider things outside my field and think that I deserve to be there. Mm-hmm. And that's worked out because I've managed to lead my field a few times.
And that's how you define your identity.
I do, because it's the biggest identification, or it's the widest thing. It gives me the most freedom. What's an entrepreneur? Right. Somebody does a new thing that hasn't been done in a new field or something like that. It's kind of anything.
But you notice a lot of people, one thing in my line of work is a lot of people, they define their identity based on their lowest point. So let's say, I'm a bad person because I was a bad father, or I did this, or a writer. And I've noticed that and that's a matter of focus too, you choose your own identity, right?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I've ever been terribly concerned about anybody else's identity. I mean, if somebody has bad things to say about you, nobody's completely invulnerable from that. But I've always thought it's a branding kind of a thing, mm-hmm. as well as a self-branding and a self-talk. Talk yourself into what you want to be. Yeah.
And I think, kind of to wrap it up, I think that's the beautiful thing about being a person is you can use this irrationality to your advantage. People want to define me as all these kinds of things on the internet, mean labels. I can choose to let them define my identity, or I can define my identity for myself, right?
Well, you're fighting against social media, so that's always a big dragon. But it would be crazy to let them define you if you have the option of doing it yourself.
Great. So do you have any, I know you don't like to do this because you don't see yourself as the advice giver, but people look to you for advice. Do you have any kind of parting words for the people?
General advice. I would say, I hate to sound commercial, but because people ask me for advice so often, that's why I wrote the book I wrote. I tried to put everything that's useful in one place. But if I had to give people, if I had to pick from that, I would say think of the world as a system and not as a series of goals. In the old days, goals made sense. It was a simple world, and if you picked a goal, it probably made sense when you got there, and you were happy you got it. Today, things are changing too fast. So the goal that you have today might make perfect sense, but only for 10 minutes. So if you're dedicating your whole life to that thing, it's a moving target that you may not be happy if you hit it. So I say build up enough skills and put yourself in enough situations. I like to use the phrase, being good out loud. Don't be good silently. Make sure people can see whatever it is you're good at, and then just increase the odds that something good is going to happen. So it's about diversification, managing your odds.
Well, and I'll plug your book before we go because it was one of the best books I read last year, maybe the best. Create the Talent Stack, right?
Yeah, the Talent Stack put together those things that work together in combination, but you don't have to be the best in the world at any one of them. They just work together well. My example is that I'm a bad artist and I'll never win a Pulitzer Prize, but I can write well. I can draw better than most people. I've got some business knowledge and some other things. You put them together and you've got a world-class comic strip without having any world-class individual talent.
And we both agree, start with persuasion. That's the base of your talent stack.
It's the thing you should understand before you even bother to learn the rest, I would say.
Great. Well, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.